Dearly liked, we are gathered here today not to mourn, but to reminisce. Though taken too soon from this world, this team brought about the happiness of many, and should be duly celebrated. Born prematurely to the format known as Regulation F, this Sun Spam team quickly showed its promise to the world, rising to the top cut of 3 early tournaments while its opponents were still finding their footing. Despite growing up in one of the most volatile swing door formats VGC has ever seen, our beloved not only rose to every challenge, but it nearly secured a Worlds invite entirely on its own. Meteor Beam Armarouge, you may be gone for the time being, but you will never be forgotten. And now, friends, let us share stories of this team's growth from December until now. Hosting the most diverse cast of viable teams VGC may have ever seen, Regulation F has held mixed opinions from players throughout its life. While many players praised it as healthy, fun, and leaving lots of room for innovation, others were understandably frustrated at constantly having to adapt to new things as if part of an arms race. I would say I sort of took a middle ground approach. I essentially played the same team for the entire format, but constantly reworking it, almost as if it was the ship of Theseus. At the beginning of Regulation F, my aim of getting a Worlds invite in my first season was looking pretty far away. After a strong start of 106 points before October was over, I finished 2023 with only 118. However, I would not give up. I had set myself a goal, and there was a fire inside of me burning to succeed. I was determined to hit Regulation F with something tested and strong, and so spent countless hours testing and rebuilding my Reg E Spam team to be ready for the new and returning threats that were to come. After 3 failed builds that never made it to a tournament, I took a build that I was about half confident in to a massive 190 player floor tour, and I managed to go 6-1 in Swiss and finish in 6th place overall. Confident in the team, I top 4'd 2 other tournaments in the same week. I knew I had hit something good. I ended up sticking with Meteor Beam Armarouge for nearly the entire format, occasionally branching out but was still aiming to remain tethered to the overall Sun Spam idea. I proceeded to earn just under 400 points this regulation, including winning 4 mid-series showdowns, one of which was the 106-player side event at the Vancouver Regionals, where I beat the Trick Room GOAT Brian Collins in the finals. I have been asked a fair bit to talk about this team and the development of it, and while I originally wanted to do one of my usual team videos, a video guide for Regulation F when Regulation G is literally about to start would only be marginally useful. Instead, I've decided to share the process of the changes I made throughout the format to keep up with how frequently the top meta threats were changing. Before getting into the first team, I thought it would be a good idea to first discuss the more evergreen Pokémon that are found on most versions: Armarouge, Indeedee, and Torkoal. While not often given the most spotlight on my channel, Torkoal was the most consistent Pokémon for me this entire format. Torkoal was tied with Indeedee for most points earned by a single Pokémon for me this season, and was never cut from any Regulation F team that I made. Torkoal has been a premier Trick Room Pokémon ever since being graced with Drought in Sun and Moon. Combined with access to Eruption, Torkoal has incredible speed potential with Fire Terra boosting it even further. While not something I thought of in the earliest Reg F builds on the channel, Weather Ball is the next best Fire Stab, being only marginally weaker than 1/2 of Eruption, which is incredibly useful when your opponent has Wide Guard. Earth Power is useful for chipping at other fire types, with potential to OHKO double weak targets such as Glimmora if they do not waste their Terra. On Charcoal builds, I would opt for Protect if playing Lilligant as well, or a toss-up between Helping Hand and Fissure if there wasn't a Lilycoal mode. On Specs builds, I opt for Heat Wave as the 4th move, so that we have reliable spread damage if we get too weak to use Eruption. In terms of Terras and stats, Torkoal is pretty much only one option on Trick Room teams: Fire Terra, max HP, max special attack, and absolutely 0 speed. Torkoal plays a useful defensive role as well, letting Indeedee, Armarouge, and other partners take significantly weakened damage from the omnipresent Wellspring Ogerpon or Rapid Strike Urshifu or other water-type threats, giving extra breathing room on the setup turn by switching in Torkoal to change the weather. After Torkoal, Indeedee was the next most crucial part of the team. Being cut only from one failed experimental rework, she had earned as many points as Torkoal, Boasting just enough bulk to do her job, an incredible move pool, and one of the best abilities in the game, Indeedee plays a crucial role in all Psy Spam based Trick Room teams, and even a few that don't bother with Psy Spam. For Psy Spam to live up to its name, Indeedee is pretty much mandatory unless you want to manually set terrain, wasting a move slot. For those unaware, Psychic Terrain increases the base power of Psychic moves by 30%, and more importantly prevents either side of the field from hitting each other with priority moves. What makes Psy Spam so strong of an archetype, however, is the move Expanding Force, which gets a 50% damage boost and becomes a spread move in terrain. This is why Indeedee is such an important partner for the likes of Armarouge and Hatterene. Indeedee's move selection tends to be the same on most Trick Room teams, though occasionally you see some niche variants in tech, such as Skill Swap and Healing Wish. Follow Me allows Indeedee to protect her partner to set up Trick Room very safely, as she can often eat one hit before going down to the second. In situations where you can safely set up Trick Room without sacrificing Indeedee, Helping Hand lets her contribute to the damage output without needing to invest in offensive stats. Dazzling Gleam is useful for breaking focus sashes, nuking the occasional single strike Urshifu, and finishing off weak opponents that manage to survive an Expanding Force or Eruption. Trick Room rounds out this set by letting Indeedee set up Trick Room herself if the partner is able to steal KO on turn 1. I've used Fairy Terra exclusively on Indeedee since Regulation D, since Urshifu is one of our most problem Pokemon, and being able to cover for both of its stabs helps trap it and neuter it. Fairy Terra also has been incredible against a lot of the Calm Mind Raging Bolt sets, as they usually only have Thunderclap and Dragon Pulse for damaging moves. This puts Bolt in a position where, with Follow Me, they are literally unable to damage our team. Rocky Helmet versus Psychic Seed is a common source of debate regarding Indeedee, but I found Helmet to be better in the long run despite Seed being by choice earlier in the format. As Focus Sash Dark Urshifu rose to become a meta staple, it was important to be able to break the sash for our sweepers to finish it off. This is also relevant against Shenpao, opposing Lilligants, and sometimes the rarely still used Sash Glamora since Moral Spin is a contact move. As you can tell by the thumbnail, or if you're a fan of the channel in general, Armarouge has become my favorite Pokemon. I fell in love with Charcadet when I saw the little guy for the first time, and getting to use one of its evolutions to such incredible competitive success has really given it a special place in my heart. Kyogre used to be my favorite, and is still a close second, but Armarouge has major sentimental value now. Armarouge had a strong niche in Regulations A to E as being the only Pokemon in the game to be able to use Expanding Force. This led to Armarouge and Indeedee being one of the most well-known underdog cores of the game, aptly named Armadee. In addition to Expanding Force, Armarouge boasts a massive pool of cannon and beam moves, including its incredible signature move, Armor Cannon, which is a close combat, but with special damage instead of physical, and being fire type instead of fighting. It's rare to have a special move with power that high that also has 100% accuracy and no recharge turn. Armarouge lost its niche of being the only Expanding Force Pokemon in Regulation F due to the move gaining TM status in the Indigo Disc DLC. Most people had thought Hatterene was better and would take its place, but I felt Armarouge brought enough to the table to still be worth considering. Boasting superior defensive typing and an ability that gives him an incredible immunity to go with Grass Terra, Armarouge was able to take a lot more abuse than Hatterene if necessary to get Trick Room up safely. With Sun support, Armarouge could even tank some super effective water hits due to his very high natural physical bulk. However, what really set Armarouge apart was gaining access to Meteor Beam, a setup move and a coverage option all rolled into a single move slot. Meteor Beam is a charge move that gives a special attack boost on the turn it is charged, so in combination with Power Herb to execute the move in a single turn, Armarouge had incredible nuke potential into Pokemon that would otherwise wall him perfectly, such as Incineroar or Chi-Yu. Meteor Beam helped keep Armarouge relevant in the early format against Entei teams, and in the later format as well against Entei's prehistoric cousin, Gouging Fire. Armarouge would end up being my Expanding Force user of choice for the bulk of the format, and I'm very proud of what we did together. While this version of the team never made it to any sanctioned tournament, it would be amiss to not give it a mention as this version is where it all started. The team, commonly called simply Meteor Beam Arma, is how I found my footing in the VGC YouTube community, and was incredibly fun to build and play in the early Wild West of the format before a meta had settled into place. A lot of design decisions on this team were based on early meta threats, which were things that preyed upon the undecidedness of the format, such as Pao-Tei Knight, a team that combined Shenpao with two extreme speed users, Dragonite and Entei. Cornerstone Ogerpon was wonderful into these teams. As with Indeedee's Psychic Terrain preventing priority, Ogerpon would outspeed either Dragonite or Entei, and with the Sword of Ruin defense debuff from Shenpao, Rock-type Ivy Cudgel would OHKO either of these Pokemon unless they Terra defensively. King Gambit replaced Ursaluna as my 50 base speed attacker of choice, due to Incineroar being omnipresent in the early format testing. At the time, I was overly concerned of Ursaluna's ability to compete with constant Intimidate switching, so I figured having King Gambit for Defiant would be smarter. Psychic Seed on Indeedee was a choice carried over from Regulation E, in which attack booster knockoff Roaring Moon was somewhat common. It was also useful against Incineroar, so knockoff from the Fire Cat did not OHKO or support Pokemon. One small difference between this team and other later teams is that Armarouge was speed crept to outspeed Incineroar, while Gallade was mid-speed. On all later teams, this was switched, with Gallade being adamant nature of 0 speed IVs to hit 85 speed. Aside from the 3 evergreen Pokemon already discussed, this team brought the following 3 staples to my builder. Gallade was almost an evergreen Pokemon in Regulation F, but in the middle of the format when I was experimenting with different Sun teams, he was left behind in favor of Lilligant for fighting damage. Being present on most teams, Gallade performed a wide variety of roles. Brian Collins nicknaming his Gallade Ceruledge was suitable, even if it did cost him being able to use it in the top cut of Sacramento. Gallade is surprisingly the perfect counterpart to Armarouge, having special bulk comparable to Armarouge's physical bulk, and physical attack comparable to Arma's special. Boasting a clear amulet to shrug off Intimidate, Gallade next to Indeedee was a great way to lead into slower threats that otherwise Sizeman could struggle with, such as Blood Moon Ursaluna or King Gambit. Sharpness is a new ability given to very few Pokemon, with Gallade being one of the lucky lottery winners. Sharpness boosts the power of cutting and slashing moves by 50%, so a Psycho Cut from Gallade on Psychic terrain hits a base power of 136 before accounting for stab or type effectiveness. While seen as gimmicky earlier in Gen 9, Gallade has cemented itself as a Trick Room size spam staple. Gallade having access to Wide Guard was crucial to allowing me to cut Wide Guard from Armarouge in favor of Meteor Beam. Because a lot of the spread damage we were used to seeing was from special attackers, Wide Guard on Gallade also meant the guessing games were less scary, as if the opponent chose to target Gallade with a single hit move like Earth Power from Landorus, there was a reasonable chance that Gallade could still survive. Gallade would be our third Trick Room setter, allowing for redundant and variable lead options into most opponents. Sacred Sword is the fighting stab of choice due to being boosted by Sharpness and ignoring opponents' boosts, which gives us a cleaner answer into Dondozo or Moody Muck. While short-lived on my hard Trick Room size spam variants, King Gambit served its purpose in the early format well. It was an excellent Incineroar check despite Incin resisting King Gambit's stabs. While King Gambit couldn't punish Incineroar directly, it would make opponents wary to bring in anything with Intimidate for fear of King Gambit proceeding to steamroll the rest of their team unchecked. Sporting Mammoth Bulk, and being one of the best Pokemon with Defiant, King Gambit has become a VGC staple even outside of Trick Room. We ran a mid-speed variant in Trick Room to perform a similar sweeping role to Ursaluna or Iron Hands from past formats. Dual Dark Stabs in Kowtow Cleave and Sucker Punch lets King Gambit get absurd value out of the Dread Plate and Dark Terra. If given the opportunity to get off a Swords Dance, or with a Defiant boost, almost nothing could survive these attacks without resisting them. Even some resists could go down in 1 or 2 hits easily if they were frail and or King Gambit was set up. On later builds of Sunroom, I'd return to King Gambit and opt for Fire Terra and Safety Goggles, allowing King Gambit to be more comfortable in front of the common nuisance Pokemon Amoonguss and Gouging Fire. I have talked in great detail in many places about how much I love Cornerstone Ogerpon for Trick Room. In fact, despite me not using it very late into the format, I'll die on the hill that it's one of the best Pokemon introduced for Trick Room teams overall in Generation 9. Mousehold has often been a Trick Room support Pokemon, boasting incredible support moves in Follow Me, Encore, Taunt, and more, but its biggest issue in this role has always been having to decide between Safety Goggles and Focus Sash. Then Ogerpon showed up one day and said, why not both? Boasting the sturdy ability, Ogerpon will always survive one hit from full health at 1 HP, just like with Focus Sash. Even though my teams did not have a way to heal Ogerpon, if you're able to get her back to full HP, then sturdy will work again, unlike Sash, which is consumed like a berry. And being Grass type, Ogerpon was immune to all Powder and Spore moves the same way a Pokemon holding Safety Goggles would be. Rock-type Ivy Cudgel, as previously mentioned, was a major boon in dealing with the rise of Entei and Gouging Fire, as well as the already common Dragonite. A simple boop on the nose from our masked friend would send these threats packing. Follow Me and Taunt would prevent Amoonguss from doing its usual job of ruining Trick Room teams. Ogerpon being 178 speed also allowed for fun interactions with Taunt, such as stopping Alolan Ninetales from using Aurora Veil. The 4th slot can be tailored to your tastes and needs, with Encore, Helping Hand, Spiky Shield, and Grass Stab all being excellent options. In the end, I went with Power Whip on most of my Ogerpon teams in order to have Grass Stab that packs a punch, but does not break our sturdy like Woodhammer does. After the meta started to settle, there were a lot more Farigiraf, Blood Moon Ursaluna, and Iron Crown running around than when I tested the first team. Entei had stopped seeing much play either, meaning I didn't really need 2 Rock-type nuke attacks. To help deal with Protect stalling and to eliminate the difficult guessing game of whether or not my opponent's Ursaluna was faster or slower than my Gallade, I've swapped Ogerpon out for Dark Urshifu with a Choice Scarf. I ran a similar set in October at the Toronto Regional, with the only changes being the Terra type and 1 move. I opted for Stellar Terra because Stellar Terra Blast helped eliminate Terra guessing games against Flutter mains and Farigirafs, while Stellar boosted U-Turn would put opposing Shenpaos into low enough HP that they would die to a Rocky Helmet after hitting Indeedee. This is relevant because Ice Spinner won't be able to clear the terrain if Shenpao dies to Rocky Helmet damage. After realizing my Ursaluna was able to OHKO an Incineroar with a Headlong Rush even after an Intimidate drop, it felt smarter to swap Gambit back to Ursaluna, so I had the excellent coverage normal ground brings to the table. This version got me a few top cuts at Premier challenges, but it still felt lacking, and I continued to try and push for new ideas. Regardless, here's more info on the 2 new additions to the team. 2 different bears were tried, and 1 remained on later builds while the other was cut. Dark Urshifu has an odd relationship with Trick Room teams. Being often a tad too slow to be a dedicated fast mode like Ogerpon or Lilligant, but being too fast to be a main sweeper at even minimal speed, Urshifu brings a lot of useful tools to the table. Unseen Fist is an obscene ability that lets Urshifu ignore Protect when using contact-based moves, which even when Choice Scarfed can put pressure on the opponent when going last under Trick Room. We go for the Choice Scarf so that Urshifu can outspeed any other threat that's not itself Scarfed, or sped up by a booster energy. Scarf sets don't usually need Sucker Punch, so in addition to U-Turn for a fast pivot, Terra Blast is an excellent coverage move in games where you can afford to burn your Terra early. Sometimes you don't need a turn 1 or 2 Trick Room when Urshifu can knock out a key piece right away. While I didn't use him for a long time in this regulation, I do love Scarf Shoe as a Trick Room Silver Bullet. Ursaluna is one of the most broken Trick Room sweepers ever created. When giving Ursaring an evolution, Game Freak decided to give the new Moon Bear such a perfect stat spread that players were planning uses for him even before he could be used in Link battles. When Regulation D was announced, Ursaluna was immediately popular as a Trick Room cooking choice. While it took a while for me to find the best use for it, by October I was a huge fan of Ursaluna as the premier physical attacker on my team, being a slow enough speed to outpace almost anything that threatens it. Ursaluna is a complete package. 140 base attack was already monstrously unfair, but giving the bear guts pushed it over the top. Being able to take a burn and not worry about spores from Amoonguss, Ursaluna would mow down opponents effortlessly. Even Intimidate swapping from Incineroar wasn't always enough to stop it, as most sets would have Swords Dance to undo the stat drops, while opponents had to protect from other threats next to him. I don't usually love Protect on my Trick Room payloads, but being able to avoid Spore from Amoonguss for 1 turn, so Flame Orb does its job, is very important, lest our bear friend get crippled by being put to sleep. Alongside Guts, Facade is the obvious normal stab option. Being doubled in power when burned, it's almost as if Ursaluna is the only Pokemon that still gets to use Return. On this team I couldn't justify running Earthquake because there wasn't many ways to reliably protect the partner Pokemon. Ghost Terra is generally the best option to avoid being faked out by Incineroar, Rillaboom, and others when the Psychic terrain has been cleared. When my friend Ryan Almeida got his first day 2 with the Lilycole team I helped make him, I decided to take another look at using it myself. After making 2 videos about the team and doing lots of my own games, I came to the conclusion that Armarouge was unfortunately just a tad too awkward. So we swapped Armarouge for Hatterene, and based on finding King Gambit to be awkward on the team, we swapped him for a Flutter main as well in order to have another Pokemon to abuse Photosynthesis. This was a relatively slow Flutter main, being outsped by Jolly Ogerpons, but it was able to take more hits than expected from opponents, and with a Choice Specs boost, plus special attack boost from Photosynthesis, Flutter could blast away almost anything. Lilligant helped plug the speed issues with After You. As discussed in the video on the original team, Weather Ball Raging Bolt was one of the strongest nukes I had ever tested. After swapping the Grass Terra to Fire, Weather Ball in the Sun with this Raging Bolt would utterly destroy even many targets that resisted fire. This version of the team brought about the most changes yet, with 4 Pokemon I had not yet used in this format. Lilligant has been a Trick Room staple as long as Torkoal has, pairing perfectly with the Fire Turtle by combining the Chlorophyll ability with the move After You. After You makes the Pokemon you target with it use its move next, regardless of turn order or priority brackets. Chlorophyll doubles the Pokemon's speed in Sun, so with Lilligant you can have Torkoal throw incredibly fast, hard-hitting eruptions at your opponents. In Legends Arceus, we were given a new Lilligant form that gave her significantly more utility by turning into a fast glass cannon physical attacker, still able to use After You. This allowed Lilligant to not become a sitting duck if Torkoal was taken down, or if Lilligant gets taunted. The set for Lilligant is pretty standard across nearly all Lilycoal variants, with Solar Blade in close combat for damage, coupled with After You and Sleep Powder for utility. Ghost Terra prevents fakeouts from Incineroar and friends, and Focus Sash lets her survive one hit when normally even something resisted will take her out. After You can also be coupled with Trick Room to get a fast Trick Room up when the opponent may use Imprison or Taunt on the Trick Room setter. This is not a widely known piece of tech, and when I used it in one of my MSSs against a very veteran player, he was incredibly shocked that it works. Raging Bolt is a fun Pokemon to play around with on Sun-based Trick Room teams. Being just slow enough to underspeed many of the slower big threats such as Rillaboom or Archaludon, and fast enough to outspeed opposing Trick Room threats otherwise. Bolt fills a role that's similar to King Gambit on the team. While we do not have room to fill a setup move on there, the ability to hit with a hard-hitting priority move outside of Trick Room is what gives Raging Neck its edge. Electric and Dragon is perfect into almost everything, but when the sun is out, Weather Ball outdamages Raging Bolt's stab moves by a small margin. And when given an opportunity to Fire Terra, Weather Ball nukes anything that will dare stand in your way. Dragon Pulse versus Draco Meteor is a common source of debate among Assault Vestival players, but after a careful consideration, I stuck with Dragon Pulse for spammability. Assault Vest is generally one of the better options on Raging Bolt, and is what allows us to justify running Weather Ball. Despite my association with Armarouge and perceived hatred for Hatterene, I don't actually have any dislike for the Pokemon. In fact, design-wise she is one of my favorites. I just think Armarouge is genuinely better for the most part. However, for this version of the team, I found that we really wanted to be able to click Dazzling Gleam next to Eruption under Trick Room, and without Ogerpon or another Taunter, Amoonguss was enough of an issue that Magic Bounce was necessary. Magic Bounce redirects all status move used by opposing Pokemon back at them, preventing Hatterene from being put to sleep or taunted. Just be wary of Parting Shot, as Magic Bounce will actually force Hatterene to switch out after reflecting the move, because Magic Bounce essentially makes Hatterene use the move it's reflecting. Although rare, sometimes when playing the Armarouge version, I found myself in a position on turn 1 where the ideal play would be to protect on my Expanding Force user, which unfortunately Armarouge lacked. Hatterene was perfect for the job here. Adding a bulky, slower Fluttermane to the team gave us devastating damage options that most opponents weren't ready to see. After Flutter survived an unexpected hit, most players would have expected it to do barely any damage left. Instead, it was ripping its enemies to shreds. Icy Wind allowed Flutter and Bolt to play a late game sweep without Trick Room, especially if Flutter comes in under Trick Room and outspeeds opposing Flutters, Shenpaos, and Ogerpons. The rest of Fluttermane's moveset was pretty stock, because there's no time combination in the game that resists both Fairy and Ghost, making it very difficult to go wrong with Moonblast, Shadow Ball, and Dazzling Gleam. The only theoretical type combination that could stand up to this is Steel Normal, a typing that has not yet been assigned to a Pokemon. After the previous team brought me my most success yet, my first time winning a mid-series showdown, I wanted to make it even stronger. Despite my love of Trick Room and Psy-Spam, the MSS that I had won had me never using the Trick Room mode a single time in the entire tournament. I had assumed that the core of Lilycoal and the 2 Paradox Pokemon was what made the team so special, so I replaced Indeedee and Hatterene with Kingambit and Landorus Incarnate, so I didn't have to focus on the Trick Room mode. Landorus gave us another fast sweeper option, one that would outspeed almost anything after an Icy Wind from Fluttermane, and Kingambit performed the same setup and priority job it did on previous teams. Except this time the chess piece was free to Sucker Punch all he wanted without our Psychic Terrain stopping him. This team did horribly, and I learned the hard way that I was better off keeping a Trick Room mode. One benefit of having the Trick Room mode in Team Preview is playing mind games versus your opponent. Even if you don't plan on bringing your Hatterene and Indeedee or your Armarouge and Indeedee, it does force your opponent to prepare for it mentally anyway, and they'll need to tailor what they're bringing accordingly. I managed to pull 3-1 in the entire tournament I used this for, but every match was a majorly uphill battle, and I missed top cut by bubbling into 5th place. Landorus would be the last new Pokemon I tried on my Sun teams in Regulation F, and as he wasn't helpful or impactful to the build, I will not be breaking him down like the rest of the Pokemon. I would continue using the Lilligant X Raging Bolt X Hatterene version of the team in a few other tournaments, winning a Premier Challenge, but missing another MSS top cut. I was finding that this team was trying to do too many things at once, and while it was incredibly strong in some rights, it was lacking some options. Between some of my tournaments, I was testing all sorts of different ideas for Lilligant X Spam, and one team that I had pitched to a few friends was essentially my Toronto team, but replacing Urshifu with Lilligant instead of Ogerpon. This version was shot down by my team building group at the time, but a few weeks later, one friend, Vic Wingley, won her first MSS with a team similar to the one I pitched. I decided to give my version of it another go, discussing a couple ideas with her, but mostly sticking to the version that I presented to my friends. The team shown on screen was first brought to a PC shortly before the Vancouver Regional. The only difference for that PC was that I went back to Psychic Seed on Indeedee. I had an MSS the same day at the same store, and after the PC put me into many positions where I wanted Rocky Helmet back, I quickly made that swap between the two tournaments. I proceeded to win the MSS without losing a single game against 3 of the most stacked players Canadian locals have to deal with. That tournament was the first time ever in my VGC career that I went home and did not feel like I needed to change the team whatsoever. Lilligant was once again becoming a force of nature in Regulation F because of the direction other teams were going. There was not a large amount of weather going around to stop our sun, and many teams were quite soft to fast, hard-hitting fire damage. This is why Harsh Flame Ogerpon also picked up in usage on hyper offense teams. Ursaluna in earlier testing felt awkward on the Lilligant builds, but after I played around with the potential of After You into Earthquake, I was quickly sold on the power level. While Lilligant is quite soft, she is able to comfortably survive 1 or 2 Earthquakes from Ursaluna, so she can throw our bear at the opponents multiple times before going down. Despite my love for Armarouge and Spam, my main mode of playing this team became to lead Lilligant and have Ursaluna and Indeedee in the back. If something was going to create issues for Torkoal, I could swap in Ursaluna and start going off with the bear. If my opponents were threatening Fake Out or other priority, I would switch Torkoal or Lilligant for Indeedee. Everything that resisted fire would take at worst neutral damage from either Facade or Headlong Rush. Gallade next to Lilligant was also excellent, as another option for the interaction between After You and Trick Room. Gallade could also cover Lilligant from Bleakman Storm or Dazzling Gleam with its wide guard. After winning the MSS, I took the team to the Vancouver Regionals. Unfortunately, I started the day with some really unlucky RNG, and had 2 losses before any wins. Day 2 seemed unlikely, but I gave it my best shot and managed to win 6 out of the remaining 7 rounds, finishing my 3rd regional in a row in the range to earn crucial championship points. I went to bed that night, confident that I could do better in the Day 2 MSS. I woke up the next morning feeling so cocky that I posted on Twitter that morning that I was about to win the entire 100-player MSS. And I did! I went 6-1 in the Swiss rounds, including beating Aaron Brock in round 7, only losing to a friend of mine in round 6 when we were both already comfortable with our ability to top cut. I finished Swiss in 3rd place, and then noticed Brian Collins was the one in 1st. I was not aware that he was at this MSS, and I was immediately starstruck to meet one of my favorite players, but also terrified at the idea of facing him in the Trick Room mirror in Top Cut. I managed to win the quarterfinals, and a technical difficulty for my opponent skipped the semifinals and put me right into the finals against Brian. We played an incredibly tight set, including a Game 3 that was filled to the brim with misses on both sides of the field, and in the end I was able to take out his Torkoal with Meteor Beam and win the whole set. I was overwhelmed with emotions and incredibly proud of the team I had built. I flew home beaming, and I made this display of trading cards to celebrate the very successful weekend I had had. I managed to earn more points than top 16 players in the main event, and the only way I could have earned more points on that weekend is if I had top cut the regional itself. Overall, Regulation F was one of the best formats I'd ever played. I turned a dismal start to the 2024 season into something incredible. When this script was originally written, here I was saying that I was on the cusp of my invite. However, as of the last weekend of April, I have succeeded in using Regulation F to secure my invite after winning my 3rd straight PC. This team is something I'm undeniably proud of, and thanks to it I'll be going to the 2024 World Championships in Honolulu. I wanted a chance to talk about it in depth, and with the format being at its end, a normal team video didn't feel right, so I took the opportunity to talk about its evolution instead. If you got this far, I thank you so much for watching and being a supporter of the channel. I have a public Discord now for team building and all things Trick Room, and if you liked the video, please consider giving the channel a subscribe. I promise you won't regret it. Goodbye for now. Ruby out.